Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Aneeb Harbith with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The United States President Joe Biden has defended his decision to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan, terming it the best available option. In a national address, Biden said the era of U.S. military deployments to rebuild other nations has ended. The U.S. President also criticized the former Afghan government's inability to fight back against swift Taliban advances. Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian says Iran will not accept retraction of talks with the U.S. to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. Amir-Abdollahian said Tehran is not skipping the negotiating table, but Washington must speak respectfully to Iran. The seventh round of the talks was halted for the presidential elections and subsequent change of administration in Iran. Israeli forces have martyred another Palestinian in the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah. Witnesses say the occupation troops opened fire at the victim and left him to bleed to death. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli forces attacked anti-blockade protesters, wounding 3 with live bullets. The World Health Organization says it is monitoring a new coronavirus variant known as Mu, having mutations that indicate a risk of resistance to vaccines. In Brazil, the COVID-19 infections have spiked sharply again as it logged over 800 new fatalities and over 24,000 cases overnight. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 101 more people lost their lives to the virus and over 3,500 tested positive in the last 24 hours. Globally, the infection tally has exceeded 217 million, with the death toll of over 4.5 million. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We start from America, where the U.S. President Joe Biden has defended his decision to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan, terming it the best available option. In a national address, Biden said the era of U.S. military deployments to rebuild other nations is over. As Taliban supporters paraded coffins draped with American, British, French and NATO flags in the mock funeral to mark the humiliating defeat of the West in Afghanistan, President Biden said U.S. pullout from the country has been an extraordinary success. He said the onus of unassailable Taliban gains in the country lies with the present Ashraf Ghani government's inability to fight back. The president said Washington achieved its war aims in Afghanistan that it set initially. But he noted the U.S. armed forces are not done with the ISIS-K yet, as he indicated unforgiving and targeted strategy against the terror group. He also called the ISIS-K sworn enemies of the Taliban.
I simply do not believe that the safety and security of America is enhanced by continuing to deploy thousands of American troops and spending billions of dollars a year in Afghanistan. But I also know that the threat from terrorism continues in its pernicious and evil nature. But it's changed, expanded to other countries. Our strategy has to change too.
Meanwhile, the question of the future of the Taliban's legitimate actors in international politics remain unanswered. The Taliban welcomed foreign investment in Afghanistan, saying the new governments will seek equal and friendly ties with other countries. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said imposing sanctions on Afghanistan's cash-strapped Taliban depends on the group's behavior. However, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said there is no way around talks with the Taliban.
Personally, I believe there is absolutely no way around talks with the Taliban. For one, because we need to solve practical things such as keeping the airport open, and also because we can definitely not afford instability in Afghanistan, because that would favor terrorism and it would have consequences on Afghanistan's neighboring countries.
Qatar also warned that isolating the Taliban could lead to further instability and urged countries to engage with the movement. The UK government said it is in talks with the group to secure safe passage out of Afghanistan, while US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington will hold the Taliban accountable for their commitment of not letting Afghanistan be used against the United States.
Now, Iran's new foreign minister says Tehran will not accept protraction in talks with the US over the revival of the nuclear deal. The minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian said negotiations for the sake of negotiations is not Iran's policy for protecting its interests. Amir-Abdollahian made these remarks in a phone call with his Croatian counterpart. He said the US should know that it can only speak to the Iranian people with respect. The minister said it will take 2 to 3 months before the new administration in Iran settles down and starts planning. But he added that Tehran is not skipping the negotiating table. The European Union has stressed the need for a resumption of Vienna talks, but no specific timetable has been set by the parties involved. Now, Israeli forces have martyred another Palestinian in the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah. Witnesses say the occupation troops opened fire at 39-year-old Raed Jadala and left him to bleed to death. They said the Palestinian laborer was crossing military control area when the soldiers opened fire. This is the third such Palestinian fatality at the hands of Israeli forces in less than a week. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli forces attacked anti-blockade protesters, wounding 3 with live bullets. Palestinian media said the troops fired live rounds and high-velocity gas bombs at protesters near the border fence. It said dozens of them suffered the effects of tear gas inhalation in addition to cuts and bruises. Now, South Korea says the US is working closely with Seoul to bring North Korea back to the dialogue table. The country's nuclear envoy, Nu Kyu-duk, made the remarks after meeting with his American counterpart in Washington. No said US remains firmly committed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through diplomacy and dialogue. He said Washington firmly maintains a forward-looking, creative and flexible stance towards restarting the dialogue. Earlier, the White House said the US is open to dialogue anywhere and anytime without preconditions. Last week, the two sides also discussed possible humanitarian assistance for the North to bring it back to the dialogue table. Now, South Korea will give China the remains of 109 more of its soldiers killed in the 1950s Korean War. The remains and 1,226 related relics were excavated from 6 regions in South Korea between 2019 and 2020. China's Veterans Affairs Ministry says a burial ceremony will be held in Liaoning's Shenyang city. Chinese People's Volunteers fought along with the North Korean army against South Korean and US-led UN forces in the war. Almost 200,000 Chinese soldiers were confirmed killed in the war, with most buried on the Korean peninsula. In 2014, Seoul pledged to repatriate the remains of fallen soldiers and has since then returned 716. Now, Ukraine has called its defense agreement with the US as a new stage in their bilateral cooperation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made these remarks in a tweet while on his visit to the US. He hailed the US's support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, gaining NATO membership and opposition to Russian aggression. Earlier, the two sides signed the agreements in the field of research, development, testing and evaluation of weapons. Washington has also promised Kyiv up to $60 million in military aid to counter Moscow's military aggression. Zelensky is scheduled to meet President Joe Biden at the White House today. Now, the World Health Organization says it is monitoring a new coronavirus variant known as Mu. The health body says the variant has mutations that indicate a risk of resistance against vaccines. Details in this report.
With a slower vaccine pace in developing and underdeveloped countries, controlling the pandemic has already been difficult. While the new variants complicate the efforts, the World Health Body has classified Mu, which was first identified in Colombia in January, a variant of interest, saying it has the potential properties of immune escape. Meanwhile, globally, the infections tally has exceeded 217 million, with a death toll of over 4.5 million. The U.S. State Department has raised a travel advisory alert for Canada, while Idaho reactivated the National Guard to help hospitals overwhelmed with unvaccinated patients. Brazil, one of the worst-hit ones, has logged over 800 new fatalities and more than 24,000 cases overnight. Brazilian researchers have found that a molecule in the venom of a type of snake inhibited coronavirus reproduction in monkey cells. This is a possible first step towards a drug to combat the virus causing COVID-19.
We were able to see that the peptides not only inhibited the development of the virus in vitro, inside the cell, but we were also able to see here in Sao Carlos that it was able to inhibit one of the proteins that is very important for the development of the virus and the propagation of new viruses.
The European Union has announced to fully vaccinate 70% of all adults across the 27-country bloc. Meanwhile, the French authorities said they aim to administer the third shot of a vaccine to some 18 million people by early 2022. New Zealanders ventured out as tough lockdown measures were eased for most of the country. However, Australia's Victoria state recorded a jump in new local cases, while the lockdown in Melbourne has been extended for another 3 weeks.
And when we hit the 80% double dose number, which we anticipate will be in November, New South Wales looks forward to having our citizens enjoy international travel. And also, New South Wales looks forward to stepping up and welcoming thousands of Australians home.
As cases continue to surge across the Philippines, prison officials said efforts are underway to inoculate thousands of inmates. In Thailand, opposition threatened to intensify street protests fueled by frustration at the government's handling of the virus outbreak.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, coronavirus has claimed another 101 lives over the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death tally has jumped to 25,889. The ministry registered over 3,500 new cases with an overnight positivity rate of 6.63%. Pakistan's caseload has exceeded 1.16 million, while more than 1,043,000 have recovered. The ministry said there are nearly 94,000 active cases, of which 5,690 are critical. The authorities have administered more than 55 million shots so far, and close to 17 million people are now fully vaccinated. More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, in Peru, at least 29 people have died in a bus accident near the town of Matucana along Central Highway. The police said the bus carrying 63 passengers plunged into an abyss in the Andes. The highway where the accident occurred connects the capital Lima to much more of the central Andes. Earlier, a bus carrying mining workers in a different part of the Andes also fell off a cliff and killed 16 on Friday. The two incidents are unrelated, although bus plunges are not uncommon in Peru. The bus plunges are common in the Andes, where the mountain range traverses the length of Peru and highways overlook tall cliffs. Now, in the UK, police have arrested over 300 protesters from the Extinction Rebellion group who staged a sit-in in central London. The protesters were demanding urgent action to limit climate change and biodiversity loss. The organisers called for a halt in all investments in fossil fuels over the emission of harmful greenhouse gases. The rebellion is demonstrating in various parts of London, targeting iconic landmarks and banks in its second week of protests. Earlier, about 50 vegan environmental activists from the Animal Rebellion group blocked a dairy distribution centre in Buckinghamshire. They were calling for a transition to a plant-based food system. Also in Peru, people displayed their creativity with recycled material in a mini car contest in Lima. More about the race cars in this report.
In an unlikely crossover, Dragon Ball's Goku defeated the Flintstones in a crazy car race. The event in Lima's San Miguel municipality saw contestants race in homemade cars built from recycled materials. San Miguel Mayor Jose Guevara lauded the involvement of families, children and parents in the contest.
Families, children and parents show their creativity in this crazy car contest. We saw the winning Dragon Ball car. They were producing smoke. I don't know how they came up with those effects. There was a lot of creativity.
The citizens enthusiastically participated in the event. The overall winners were three friends who built a car inspired by the Dragon Ball animation.
We gave it our souls, our hearts and life. And it's incredible we built this car in a couple of days. And here's the result of the union between three friends.
Second and third place were taken by Flintstones and Fast and Furious themed cars.
Now, most stocks in the Asia-Pacific are trading cautiously higher. Investors are weighing the economic impact of COVID's Delta variant spread and the overnight gains made on Wall Street. The Nikkei 225 in Japan is leading the gains, rising over 1%. Shares in mainland China and Hong Kong have added over 0.5% each. Sales Kospi has also edged up marginally. However, Australia's ASX 200 has slipped fractionally. And with that, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.